up, what's up, what's up?
Welcome back
to the podcast
with Paiton and Evelyn.
Yes, we are back, y'all. We are back with another video. I know that after y'all heard the last one, you know, we said we were gonna do a part 2 to the mess from last time, but you know, we gonna take a little break from that conversation. Then we're gonna get back to talking about boundaries and stuff like that at another time, because that is a very important conversation to have.
Yes.
It's very serious type of conversation to have, you know, how to create boundaries with family, friends, you know, relationships, stuff like that, because a lot of us really don't have those boundaries like we should, or we don't hold to those boundaries. So we definitely want to be able to talk about that and open up that conversation so people aren't scared and don't feel afraid to, you know, set those boundaries and actually speak up for themselves.
Yep. And not only that, just, you know, talk about their experiences with boundaries and stuff like that, because everybody's experience with that is different. People go on their own journeys on how to set those, when's the right time. So we'll have to come back with a part 2 to kind of just, you know, clarify certain things.
We just had to get your feet wet a little bit.
Just a little bit.
You know, you have to
just
get your feet wet a little bit.
You know, it was a little discussion. You know, a little heated discussion.
You know, we good over here, though.
We good. I mean, people have conversations all the time.
We good, though. It is okay to disagree, you know. You don't always have to, you know, fight and it be a disagreement. You can just, like, you know, you just disagree. You don't always have to agree on everything. And I think that shows that me and Evelyn don't always agree on everything. Or, you know, we actually have to, you know, go through conversation. It may take us a while to understand what the other person is saying, you know. So I hope that that was helpful to teach other people, you know, communication and how communication kind of works.
Yeah, and just how to unpack certain things.
Yes. So speaking of unpacking, today we are going to unpack the difference between standards and preferences, because I do believe there is a huge confusion between the both of like those things. I think people get preferences mixed with standards and standards mixed with preferences, and I want to give a couple examples of the difference as well, so hopefully that'll help someone out. And we also want to get into a little bit about like red flags as well, because red flags are huge, y'all, and we just always seem to ignore them. Like, especially, you know, when we really want something, we just ignore those red flags because we want it so bad. So we're going to talk about that too. But first, let's get into standards versus preferences. So I feel like first we need to understand the difference between a standard and a preference. Personally, I feel like when it comes to preferences, a preference is something that can be changed. A preference is a little more flexible, because a preference is, you know, it's more so like height is a preference. Like when someone says, you know, oh, I want this person to be, you know, 6 foot tall, you know, or a guy may say, you know, they want a girl that's short or whatever. That's a preference. That's not really a standard that you can hold someone to, because they're not able to change their height. Their height is something that they were born with. So it can't be a standard, because it's not something that they can actually be able to change for you. They can't change their height for you, therefore height is an example of a preference. A standard is something that's more solid and not so flexible for you to be able to change. A standard is more, I feel like, based off of morals and values. You know, like it's my standard to be in a relationship with another person who also believes in God. Because when it comes to that is something that someone is able to control. They're able to choose, you know, whether or not they want to believe in God. So it's not, for me, that's not a preference of, you know, well, some people can, they'll be like, oh, I can believe in God, but I don't have to be with somebody that does. But for me, it's not. It's a standard that other person has to, for me to feel like, you know, the relationship and the connection that we have can really thrive. Versus my preference may be, you know, to be with somebody that's like 5'10", but if I was, you know, with somebody that was like 5'5", or if I was with somebody that was 6'5", it wouldn't really matter, because that's something that I'm more flexible on, because it's just a preference.
Yeah, you can kind of, you know, bend your preferences based on like how that person kind of, you know, perceive certain things or how they communicate certain things with you, because you can like you say, have a preference for somebody, but it may not be a deal breaker for you, that preference.
Right. So I feel like, okay, I'm trying to figure out how I was going to ask this question. But, so for you, is there something that you've heard people say, you know, when they're like trying to decide, I guess, or make decisions on what they like about someone? And have you ever heard somebody say something that you felt like, no, that's more of a preference? Like you shouldn't have said that, because that's something that person can't change. That's just a preference.
I think this conversation kind of reminds me of the topic of skin color, because there is always, well, not necessarily skin color, but it could be race as well. So you have people that feel like people's ideal of a partner, of whether they want somebody that's lighter, somebody that's darker, somebody that's of a different race, that they don't really know where that weighs in. Is that somebody's preference or is that their standard? Now, I feel like for me, a preference would come into play if that's just your, you know, so you have an ideal person in your mind, and that's the person you want. I think standard kind of comes into play when you are kind of using whatever your preference is, but using it as fuel that's borderline like hate to some extent. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you can have a preference of, well, I don't want somebody with a size 15 shoe. Or I don't want somebody that is, you know what I'm saying, I want somebody that has a certain build. But if they are a certain build and they come in my face, or if they want to talk to me, I'm not going to give them the light of day. Because that type of person, I don't even want to have nothing to deal with them. I can't stand them, blah, 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 this and that. They beneath me, that kind of attitude. I think that's when a kind of standard comes into play that I don't necessarily agree with. So I think that topic of like race, skin color, all of that, when it comes to the preference of what somebody likes, I think it's something that I have, you know, kind of seen and heard of for a lot of people. And it's kind of like a touchy subject, I would think. Because I think a person's attitude and character behind what their preference is matters. I think that matters. And just the type of person you are in general.
Yeah. So kind of on the lines of what I heard you saying then, do you feel that preferences can be negative in a way? And do preferences mess people up from building real strong relationships? Like, do you think that preferences can be dangerous because they kind of create like a, you know, like a hateful, attacking narrative to close people off to only like certain things, you know?
I think it depends on like closed-mindedness. So I always had a preference over certain things, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm closed off to the latter. You know what I mean? So and I think that kind of comes into not just relationships, but other things in general. And I think it kind of ties into our other topics about like potential and you know, having a certain standard for someone, or you know, have that list for somebody. Preferences like that. And you could have a preference, and that preference can change over time. So I think if that preference is set into like closed-mindedness, I think that becomes an issue. Because for me, necessarily, I have preferences, but I've noticed that my preference for things and my ideal for things in my life change a lot. I've never had a preference for something and it stayed the same, you know, like for an extended amount of time.
Right.
Because, you know, you age, stuff happens, and your outlook kind of changes, I think, with your preferences.
Yeah.
That's what I believe.
Yeah. Like I kind of said, like, preferences are able to change. Like, that's one thing about preferences. Like, preferences are more flexible than just saying, you know, this is my standard. Because a standard is more like kind of what we said in a past episode when we were talking about non-negotiables.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what like a standard is.
Mm-hmm.
A standard is more like a non-negotiable. Like, this is what I want, and if I don't have this in a person, then my relationship is obviously not going to thrive. Like, the standards are the things that you need to hold true to, because you know that if you don't have that, or if that person's, you know, personality is not this type of way, or, you know, if you had maybe like a negative, jealous type of person around you, you're like, my standard is not to be in a relationship with someone that's jealous. That is some people's standard. Other people, they may not care. Someone else, they may say, I don't want to be with a jealous person because, you know, maybe I am a more friendly person and I like to talk to a lot of people. I'm more extroverted. I like to open up. And I don't need to be in a relationship with somebody that's jealous, because they're going to be upset maybe if I just giggle at, you know, what somebody said, or if I just smiled at somebody or waved and said hello. So your standard is to not be with a jealous person, because you know that for you and your personality, that relationship wouldn't work. So that's not really a preference. That's a standard that you can't be with a jealous person.
And I think standards are kind of tied to morals in a way, because I think anything you interact with, say it be a person, a thing, it kind of builds your character, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it can influence you as well. So I think the standards are the things that you kind of keep around. So it is tied to some type of, you know, moral and set of morals, I think.
Yeah. I definitely, I agree with that, that standards are kind of tied to, like, your morals and your values, and, you know, just, like, more so things about, I would say people's personality, because it seems like preferences are more so tied to, we put it on, like, physical traits. We most times put preferences on, like, physical attributes about people, you know, like their eye color, their hair texture, their skin tone, like you said, you know, height, or even their weight, or, you know, the type of body type that they have. Like, usually preferences are more physical. And I would like to say that I think that sometimes preferences can be harmful, especially on just like the topic of skin tone, which we're not going to get into today, because that is, like you said, a touchy, you know, topic, and
very controversial.
Yeah, when you really dive into that, it's a lot of things, you know, that kind of go into that having that discussion, basically. But I feel like, you know, that's why, because preferences, even though, you know, people have a right to have their preference, like, I would never tell somebody that they're, you know, not allowed to prefer one thing over the other. Also, you have to be careful that even though that's your preference, you're not attacking someone else that's not your preference, right? Because you may not prefer that, but someone else might. So you can't attack, you know, you have to remember not to attack that individual, make them feel bad about themselves, because just because they're not the right person for you doesn't mean that they're not the right person for someone else. So I feel like it's important that even when you're expressing your preferences, you're not, you know, saying it in a mean manner or rude or disrespectful type of way. So that way, you know, that person understands, like, you know, like, I'm not trying to say that, you know, you are a problem, but this is, you know, this is just what I personally prefer for me, but you would be the right person for someone else because you'd be their preference. So I would also tell people, don't get so stuck up or offended by other people's preferences too, because I think sometimes we let people's preferences of what they like or what they may say kind of get to us, and we kind of ponder on it for a while, and we allow that to eat us up inside and, like, allow it to dim our confidence. But I would say don't let that dim your confidence, because a preference is literally just that. It's just what they personally prefer. Just like you may personally prefer maybe hot dogs over hamburgers. That's just a preference. Doesn't mean that there's something wrong with hamburgers. Somebody else probably loves them, but that's just what you prefer. So I would say don't let what people have to say about preferences and stuff like that hurt you or hurt your, you know, how you view yourself as a good person. Like, still be confident in who you are, still feel good about yourself, because, like, their preference at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It shouldn't really faze you. Because like I said, it's just a preference. So yeah, when it comes to like red flags, I would say, well, some people will say that, you know, red flags are there, so when you see the red flag, you should take a moment to realize that it's there, but you don't have to necessarily, like, I guess, bring the red flag up to the person, or you know, automatically get cautious of it. Like, just put that, you know, take note of red flags. And then other people were like, you know, when I see a red flag and I know that that's something that I don't like, I'm running for the hills. You know, I've also heard other people say that, like, they instantly, you know, oh, red flag, done. You know, this relationship is over. And then I hear other people say, oh, that was a red flag, you know, but they give people more flexibility on their red flag. So how do you feel about that?
I feel like the people pleaser. I feel like,
how do you feel about red flags?
It ties into what category you have placed that red flag in. If it's a preference, if it's a preference that you set, and they have done something that you have deemed a red flag based off your preference, or if they've done something that you have deemed a red flag based off your standard, then if we're on that subject, between the two, it would depend on what category you put it in. Because if you've seen a red flag on somebody that's, you know, a part of your preference, is that necessarily a deal breaker for you? You know what I'm saying? Is it that serious for you in that moment? Like, how much of a preference is that for you? Now, if it's a standard, which we have all decided are non-negotiables, and that is a red flag, then to me that's a little more on a serious note. So if we're at a moment where you have done something and you don't realize that has been an issue for me, then that's a problem. Now, if you have done something and we can, I guess, talk about it and kind of see if you yourself can see that you have done something that has made me uncomfortable and that needs to be changed, I feel like that maybe that's something that can be discussed. But if you yourself don't even know that was a red flag to me, and you don't see it as an issue, then that's when it becomes a problem. And for me, that's why I say, like, communication is really important. Because if we have already discussed this, and you have done it the opposite of what we have discussed, that in itself was an issue already. I think. Because you shouldn't even have a red flag in general, you know what I'm saying, for something we've already discussed. So I think it depends on what category you put it in. And it depends on what the red flag was.
That's true.
Because some red flags is just, that's disgusting.
Well then, let's play a little game of they're a 10, but, and then you can say if that's a red flag for you.
Alright.
So I'll start it off. They're a 10, but they're a natural flirt. Is that a red flag for you? Not that they cheat on you or that they're talking to other people, but you know, they just may, you know, when they see people, they may give a little certain type of smile, certain type of wave, you know. They may give warmer hugs, you know, because they're not cold. They're a natural flirt. They're a 10, but they're a natural flirt. Is that a red flag for you?
Alright, so you know I always gotta ask questions.
Okay.
You know I always gotta ask questions. What if they aren't necessarily a flirt, but they are literally just a people person?
The comment is, but they're a flirt. They're a natural flirt. Because there are people out here that are a natural flirt. Like, that's how their personality is like.
And I know the type of person you're talking about.
Yeah.
So that, to me, that's a red flag.
That's a red flag.
That's a red flag for me. Because for me, I'm a nice person. You know this, but I set aside certain things for certain people. You know what I'm saying? I'm not the same way with everybody. So if you can't present, you know, yourself in that same way, that's a problem, because you have no self-control over, you know what I'm saying, certain parts of yourself.
Right.
So for me, that would be a red flag.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I would say that that's like a red flag for me as well. I feel like it's okay to be a nice person, you know, to care about people, to communicate, and really be a people person and talk to people. I don't mind that. But I don't know, it's just something about like when you're a natural flirt, like, you know, like you can be charming, because I know some people are just like, you know, they just have very charming personalities, so sometimes it will come off as flirting.
And they get along with people.
Yeah, and they're not necessarily flirting, but they're just, you know, they good with their words. They, you know, they flash that smile at you, and it can come together as like flirting, but they're not. But I feel like if you really like pouring it on thick and doing too much, like, you know how much, I feel like it's doing too much. I feel like I don't have to tell a grown person how much is doing too much. So if you're doing a little too much, then that's a red flag. But if you're not doing too much and you're just like a charming person, then I can't really knock you for that if that's your personality.
Yeah, and I feel like if somebody and outside is observing you as a flirt, then that's a problem. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Because it's a person that doesn't really know you in that way, so they can feel it in that issue. Then
love you, and we'll hear from y'all soon. Bye.
See you soon.